Hey, so in the first workflow video that I posted for how I'm extracting my songs out of Ableton and getting them onto the Octatrack so that I can continue to play around with them there and perform them live in a way that gives me a lot of flexibility for editing and doing things on the fly. There was a part of that workflow that as I started building up more songs on the Octatrack, I realized actually has a pretty serious limitation. So just flipping over here to the view in Ableton. So in that workflow video, I talked about how I use the locators here to mark things out into the various patterns that I'm going to use. And I'm trying to stick to a rationale of one bank per song, which means I'm limited to 16 patterns. And so to make that work in a longer or more complicated song, what I've been doing is sort of economizing by saying, where I need a 4-bar pattern because there's 4 bars and then it changes significantly, then I'll use a pattern, then another pattern. But there's parts in the song like this where it's 8 bars where virtually nothing changes in some sections, or it's just a long 8-bar loop in others. And so in this case, I wanted to use only one pattern because they're obviously scarce. I've only got 16 of them. But use one 4-bar pattern to basically recreate this 8-bar sequence. And in the workflow video, what I talked about was using a one-shot trig whereby, this part here, it doesn't change over the 8 bars. So I'd probably just have a 4-bar loop of that, and that'll trigger in the at the first step of the 4-bar pattern. That's fine, no problem. This bit here is obviously an 8-bar loop, and so I'd render that out as that 8-bar sample there, put a one-shot trig at the start of the pattern. So I've marked it out as pattern 4. So I'd put a one-shot trig at the start of pattern 4 to play that sample and to continue playing that sample without starting it again because it's a one-shot when the pattern comes around for its second run, because it's going to have to loop. It's going to have to play twice for this 8-bar section here. That works great first time around, but then it doesn't work when I got to the follow-on patterns here where I tried to do the exact same trick. Same thing here in pattern 5. I wanted to have step 1 here, a one-shot trig that would start this 8-bar sample playing, whilst other things that we can't really see would just 4-bar loops looping underneath them. And again, same here. This is obviously a 4-bar loop, so I wanted that to just loop over and over again in the pattern. But this 8-bar sample started the first time it loops and then just keep playing that sample out without restarting. And I was going to do the same thing again here, but this time across 16 bars. So why doesn't this work? So if we flip across to looking at the Octatrack here. So I'm in pattern 4 was the problematic pattern. Triple tap stop rearms your tracks. I've now developed a nervous tick whereby I just keep pressing stop before I do anything. But if we play this now, okay, that's great. That's playing. That's actually that 8-bar loop playing there. That sort of shimmery pad sound. And so the idea here is that this pattern 4, should play twice, and then I move it on to pattern 5. And when we start pattern 5, another 8-bar loop starts. So let's see what happens. This is once through the pattern. Now I'm going to do twice through the pattern, and I'll set it up to go to pattern 5. Now we get to pattern 5, and there's no pad sound. It stopped. Why? This perplexed me all night, and I couldn't work it out because it looks as though I've done everything right. We go to pattern 4, go into grid mode. Yep, there's my one-shot trig. Cool. Let's go to pattern 5. I've got my one-shot trig. Okay. Arm it. Looks good. Pattern 4. Arm it. It looks good. So what the hell's going on? So I'd go in, I'm going to pattern 4 here, and I've got the one-shot, I should say. Okay, so I'm in pattern 4. My one-shot is armed. I'm in pattern 5. My one-shot is armed. Starting pattern 4. Hit play again. First time through. Notice it flashes now because that one shot is already gone. Second time through and it doesn't start this again, which is perfect. Now we move on to pattern 5 at the end of this section. And I'm in pattern 5 and audio stops. I found out the reason for this is that once you've fired a one-shot trig in any pattern on a track, that disarms the track completely. The track does not rearm itself when you move to the next pattern or the next bank or anything like that. The one-shot trigs, you arm them manually when you start playing, or whenever you want them to go off. But then once that one-shot trig has fired, that track is disarmed for all patterns for that track. So that means my little trick here, just back in Ableton, my little trick here of wanting to have a one-shot that fires there to play that out, and a one-shot that fires there to play that out, and a one-shot there that fires and plays that out, and another one that fires there and plays that out, ain't gonna work for me, because these loops were all gonna play through one track. So that kind of sucks. But the Octatrack is way smarter than me, and what I discovered is the hacky way that I was doing this, there's actually a really great way to do it that's not a hack at all, and I don't have to bastardize the sort of looping of 4 versus 8, and there's actually a way to set this up to work properly. Actually, there's 2 ways I found to do it. And again, the only reason I need to do this is because I'm trying to economize and keep my songs down to just 16 patterns for a song. I guess there's 3 ways around this. I could move to using multiple banks per songs. That's not really an issue at all. I'd essentially then have 2 banks and 4 parts per bank and 16 patterns per bank. So if I use 2 banks, I've got 32 patterns. Awesome. I've got 2 sets of 4 parts to play with there, which would be probably a bit nicer to work out the grouping of samples. But my goal here was to set myself an arbitrary structure of song, bank per song, 16 patterns to recreate the song. So if I want to stick within that, there's 2 things I can do here. And again, just to orientate ourselves here, we want pattern 4 to play this, and the pattern should loop for 8 bars. Then I move on to pattern 5, and this kicks off another sample, a different sample, which again loops through for 8 bars. So, simple way to do this. In pattern 4, just for now, I'll keep that as the one-shot trig just to demonstrate that that is still working, and we're arming and disarming that. But we're going to find a way to make pattern 5 work properly without having to manually arm tracks. I could manually arm the track each time I change pattern, but that's not going to work for me. I want to use this live. I'm going to struggle to remember the patterns, the order of the patterns as it is, and so I was going to use the arranger to move me through the patterns, and I sure as hell don't want to have to keep hitting arm to make this work. So that's not a viable way to do it. So pattern 4's got the one shot. Pattern 5, we need to fix the fact that this one shot doesn't fire because the track's been disarmed after pattern 4 plays. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn that trig off, and then I'm going to turn it back on, and now it's just a plain old trig, not a one shot, because it's just red, it's not any fancy colors. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this pattern actually last for 8 bars by going here into the scale and setting the speed here to half. So I've still got a 64-step pattern, but instead of each of those steps being a 16th note, it's now going to be an 8th note because it's essentially playing back at half the speed. So whereas the pattern used to play for a full 4 bars, now the pattern plays for 8 bars. So let's just see if this works. So we'll save that out. We've got our one trig set up here. Just make sure we didn't get it on any other pages. Nope. And we'll go back to pattern 4, arm it, play it. This is the first time through. Second time, set up our pattern change. And we still don't have playback. Why? What did I do wrong here? So we're in D5. Got my trig set up. I'm on the right page. Oh no, we do have playback. Okay, my bad. It was just too quiet and I didn't notice it. Haha, my bad. So let's just reconfirm that really does work. I'll put the headphones on a little bit closer so I can hear it, even though I get a bizarre echo of myself. Pattern 4. Play it. First time through. Second time, set up the pattern change. Awesome, there we go. So that works. So I've now got my pattern 4 playing as a 64 step of 16th note steps for 4 bars. And I can loop that, I can let it loop twice to play that 8-bar pattern using a one-shot. But then that's the only time I can use the one-shot. Then, unless I wanted to go manually rearm the track, which I definitely don't want to have to mess around with, then, you know, in subsequent patterns, like even in pattern 6 here, I'm going to do the same thing, go into my pattern scale and say, play this at half speed. So it's now actually going to play, when it plays once through that pattern, it's going to be actually for 8 bars, not 4, because it's playing at half the speed. Cool, that's one way to do it. There is another more complicated way, of course, because that's the beauty of the Octatrack, is this thing just has many different ways to do things, and it is put together with a hierarchy and a sense of engineering that is just absolutely beautiful to my nerdy mind. So I'll show you a different way to do this. So pattern 5, we did it the easy way of just setting the half speed in the scale, give us an 8-bar pattern. Pattern 6, we're going to do something really freaking cool. So if we go to function, pattern settings, we can actually go here to the pattern and say the scale mode is per track. Ooh. So now when I've got my track selected where I've got this 8-bar loop, I'm going to go into the scale section here, and I can actually set that this pattern is going to be 64 steps at half the speed, but the master pattern, like the actual full length of this pattern, is going to be 128 steps at normal speed, 1 speed. You can't quite see it on the display here, but there's 64 of 64 steps running at half speed for this track. And master for this whole pattern is 128 steps at 1 time speed. This is really cool and opens up a bunch of possibilities for things like polyrhythms and multi-length loops playing under one track, playing under one pattern in different tracks. So in this case, I've achieved the exact same thing. The beauty of this is that this has only affected my track 4. If I go to my track 3 and open up the scale page, I've got completely different settings here. I could set this one to be, you know, let's say I could say this one I only want 32 steps playing at full speed. So maybe I've just got an even shorter loop there, like a 2-bar loop. And the fact that I've changed that to 32 there doesn't change the settings that I have for track 4, which is still running my 8-bar length. So does this work? Let's go to our, let's get out of the scale settings, check our trigs. So in this case, I've still got this one-shot trig, which we know is going to fail. So I'm going to get rid of that, just put it back as a simple one-shot. This one, other track was already, sorry, just as a simple trig, not a one-shot, I should say. This trig here this track was already just a simple normal trigger. So is this one. So if we play this now, we're getting all of our parts playing. I'm actually just going to mute this because it's the beeps that you hear there is kind of orthogonal to the point here, but see if we still get our pad sound. Yep, we do. Now, does this work end to end? Let's try pattern 4. So we'll do arm all our tracks. Let's see how we go. So we're going to play pattern 4 through, then go to pattern 5 and pattern 6. No more use of one-shot trigs because they weren't working once we'd used it once. And let's see if we hear audio when we change between each of these. First time through. Second time through. Set up our pattern change to 5. And there's 5, and we've got the different sample playing first time through. So now we're on to, this would have had the loop before, but now it's at the end. We'll set up our change to 6. And there we go, we're on to 6 to play that loop in 8 bars again without having to use a one-shot trig. but the beauty of this is I can still maintain 64/16 steps on some tracks where I want that resolution. But then if I don't need that sort of resolution for sequencing things, I can always just set the track to be running at half speed, which means I have less steps available, less resolution, but I achieve the same aim of a pattern plays for a full 8 bars rather than just 4. So super happy to have found both of these approaches. It speaks volumes to the way that the Octatrack is laid out in such an awesome technical way. It is an incredibly well engineered piece of equipment, and I've only really just scratched the surface. So I hope this helps, and just the thing to keep in mind here, the main lesson to learn is one-shot trigs. Once they fire once, they disarm that entire track unless you go and rearm them manually. Alright, I hope this helps.